Good morning, everyone. We will now call the June 27th, 2024 Audit Committee meeting to order. Mr. Gaither, will you please call the roll?
Representing Educational District 1, Ms. Katie Howard.
Present.
Representing Educational District 2 and Chair of this committee, Ms. Aretta Baldwin.
Present.
Representing Educational District 6, Ms. Isha Collins. I do also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge Brian Hawkins, one of our community advisors who is present. Nina Gupta, our General Counsel, Connie Brown, our Executive Director of Internal Compliance. Our Chair, Erica Mitchell, has joined via Zoom. And of course, I want to say happy birthday to Dr. Battle. And so I had to save her for last. Happy birthday, Dr. Battle. With that being said, Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Pierre, and a very happy birthday, Dr. Battle. And special thanks to our community panelists for joining us in person. It's so nice to see the rest of you. I'm so used to seeing, the head in the square. So I appreciate you coming down and joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
And of course, Board Member Howard, it's great to see you. And thank you all who have joined us. I will now entertain a motion to approve the agenda for the June 27th, 2024 Audit Committee meeting.
So moved.
And second. So it has been moved by Board Member Howard and seconded by myself. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? No, motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the March 21st, 2024 Audit Committee meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second. So I have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Motion carries.
HR perspective.
We will now move to our discussion items. Please note that all documents are located within our Assembly platform. I will turn it over to Connie Brown, Executive Director of Internal Audit, to take us through the agenda.
So from a fund perspective, you might have fund managers or you might have fund
Chair
gatekeepers related to
Baldwin.
those funds. If the general fund
Committee members,
would
Dr.
just be a
Battle.
general fund. But if
Welcome.
you, I know there was an activity fund.
In our
and I was talking with my
presentation this
sister-in-law. They had two
morning, we
funds.
will
I don't know how many
provide
funds you have at
a
school
final
level, but
update on our school
could be
year
special
2024
projects.
audit plan.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
We also have several report outs planned that include the Office
So
of
the general would be
Employee
kind of, I would think
Experience
it'd be
and
more your standard
Performance
flow.
Division,
Okay? But then your slush
Special
fund might be-
Education, our
Did you say slush? I heard.
remediation efforts project. We'll be going over that. As well as our risk assessment and our proposed audit plan for 2025. So I'm going to jump right in because my piece won't
And
take
that-
that
that is a
long,
type
so I
of
know
fun.
there's a lot to get through
It's
in
not-
this agenda
not that it's
today.
not there, but yeah,
But I
okay.
think it's
Yeah, so-
important that
so
I
the state
provide an
one might have
update
a
with
different
where we
type of
stand on the
direction
2024
around that.
audit plan.
And so when we
I'm
set up-
happy to
so we have
report
standard
that
workflow.
we
We
completed
also have the ability to create
90% of the
workflow
approved
within
plan
the guided buying
successfully this
regime
year.
to
I'm
adhere
really
to
excited
the
about that.
fund categorization.
And the remaining 10%
which
we plan
we
to
have one- we
incorporate
have
in the
one- so for
school year
example, here, when I go in
2025
and I
audit
say,
plan. But our 90% completion rate represents a
I'll
33%
go back to that laptop
increase
example.
over last year's completion rate.
And I actually pick a
We
laptop.
completed
So I go
more
ahead
audit projects this year
and
than
I
we
go
did
ahead
in the
with this
previous 2
laptop,
years.
and
And
I
a
add-
lot of that had to do with some resource constraints.
So when I add this to the cart,
And and it
check
could
out.
not have been done with our
you'll see
partners,
now
Plant
is
Moran.
at the
You're
bottom,
going to be
it's
hearing
creating
from
the
them
workflow.
today.
And right now I
Carl
have
Riggs
one
and
approver.
Ingrams, you're going to
Vice
hear from them
principal.
today. And our IT
$500,
consultants
vice
were
principal's gonna approve
Securant,
that. We're
so
good to
they
go.
were
This as an example. Now,
instrumental in
if I
providing
say I change this from
talented
5, you
and
see the unit price
consistent
is also
resources
500?
so that we could get our audit
an eye
work
on that
done.
as well.
So
If I
I
change
think
this to
that
10,
played a huge role in us being
the
able
unit
to
price is now
complete as much as we
490
did this year.
because we have tiered pricing.
And while we
for
did
that
complete
contract.
a lot of projects,
That's one
it's
aspect. Now,
important that I
down
share
below, now
with
we
the
need a purchasing
committee,
agent involved based
how
on the
efficient
dollar
we were
amount
in
that's going
completing
through.
some of those projects.
Now, if the
We
fund
talked about
changed,
safety and
we could
security because
have
that was a
somebody
project
else
that we
involved
reported out on in
because of the fund
December.
element that's
But
involved in it.
between safety and
Does that make sense what I'm
security
saying?
and I want to say special education, we did
Right,
go
it's layering. You're
20% or
layering it
more
in
over
based on
budget.
the
We talked
aspects
about
that you're-
safety and security.
the
It
information
was
that's being submitted.
a lot of staffing transitions
Now-
and turnover
go ahead,
at the
sorry.
time. And we didn't anticipate the amount of time and effort it would take to to perform the on-site visits and follow up
Exactly.
with the appropriate documentation.
Exactly. Yeah. So
For our
so
special
it was more of a,
education,
a
we went over
reflection of
by
what we were just
about
talking about, but he's saying
117
that
hours, but
it also
again,
can
I
be
think
reflected
the
based on the
majority of
fund
that
that's
was a
chosen and
scope
the dollar amounts
expansion.
that's tied to it.
And
If it's under
again,
1,000, maybe nobody. If it's over 1,000, it's going to be
some of our documentation not
Makes
being
sense.
where we expected it to be at the time.
transactions to a specific buyer by the fund.
Give him a minute to
Now, when I
pull
look
that
down
back up.
below, you'll see here I have the ability to add to this. So I could go ahead
You
and
guys
I can
do
add
have a copy
approvers
of
and
it.
watchers.
In terms of
Remember I talked about
our
watchers
audit plan
earlier?
for
You could have
2024,
watchers in the approval flow already. But this
with
is
the
giving
exception
you
of
that other
governance, we're going to
ability
roll
say,
that
okay,
over
the
into our
vice principal needs to be
2025
involved. The
audit.
principal needs to, or the superintendent needs to
Are there
approve
any
it, right?
questions about the
The
work
vice
we
principal
performed? We
just needs to be
are
involved, or the
going to be
principal needs to be
reporting out
involved.
on a majority of
I
this
can add them as a
plan
watcher
later
so that
in this
they're
meeting.
kept aware of what's
But
going on throughout the.
are there any questions at this point? I'll keep it moving.
One second, we're just checking to see if there's anyone online that has any questions. Okay, we're good.
And the presentation is okay.
Aha.
So I'm going to jump into the other piece of work that our office does every month, actually every day, is we manage our ethics and compliance concerns. So we continue to do that over the past quarter. Again, we continue to receive our concerns through the ethics and compliance line, Let's Talk, emails, referrals from other departments, and for the 3-month period ending May 31st, okay, that's what's going to happen. We received actually 57 concerns, and 20 of those concerns were managed by the Office of Internal Compliance. The issues reported included student activity compliance issues, accounting and auditing irregularities, background check compliance issues, and policy issues. And we also received an additional 5 concerns through Let's Talk, so that brought our total of cases worked this past 3 months to 25. We were able to substantiate 2 of those concerns. 2 of those concerns were partially substantiated. 8 were completely unsubstantiated, and the majority of them, as in previous report outs, we did not have enough actionable information to actually perform any review on those. But as of the end of March, all of the cases that we received were worked and closed, and resolution related, shared with everyone. So at this point, I want to bring up Brianna
I have a
Solario.
quick
Oh,
question.
I'm sorry.
Just
I'm
a quick
sorry.
question on the ethics and compliance
Okay.
reports. So for the 8 that are unsubstantiated, that means that you had information to look at and it did not meet the level of,
Correct.
okay. And then the no review performed means that you did not have information to review?
I did not have enough information presented in the report, and when I asked for follow-up information, I got no response, so we closed it out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
At this time, I'm going to ask the AV to switch over to our Plant and Moran presentation, because I want to talk about our remediation efforts. We've always acknowledged and recognized the importance of regular follow-up on corrective action plans. The follow-up work fosters a culture of accountability and contributes to the overall effectiveness and integrity of the district's operations. We continued our efforts to follow up and validate open corrective action plans this year. That was one of the goals I set. The goal was to determine what's outstanding, validate as much as we could before June 30th, and report out and provide the committee with an update. Our follow-up work is a continuous process. It's never ending, but we are making steps with our partners to make sure we can stay consistent and constantly move forward with it. So I'm going to ask Brianna if she could briefly update the committee on the work that we did this year.
Pulled up, but while that pulled, wanted to
You need this?
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So, hi everyone, I'm Brianna Solorio with Plant Moran, and thank you. Okay. Okay, so I can quickly introduce the rest of the team that will also be presenting later today. Also joined by Matt Bowden, partner on our team, and Caroline Main, senior manager on our team. And starting off with the internal audit remediation update, we wanted to first share our approach with you all to determining the status of each of the findings and corrective action plans. So for any open findings and management action plans that had an implementation date prior to March 31st of 2024, we submitted surveys to leadership and those identified as the responsible party in the audit report to determine the status. For any findings that leadership indicated had not yet been remediated and those corrective action plans had not yet been implemented, we held interviews with them to understand the root cause for why those had not yet been implemented. We also confirmed any circumstances that may have changed the agreed upon corrective action plan, and we also agreed upon a future implementation date with management for those items. And then for any findings that leadership indicated had been remediated, we initiated our sample-based testing to validate that. I'll share a few visuals here which provide an overview of the status. This first one shows the results of our inquiry with leadership. So the bars in teal for each audit represent the number of action plans that management indicated had been implemented by them and their teams. So this was about 84% of the open management action plans that they'd indicated had been implemented, and we initiated our testing and validation of those. And then the remaining 16% are shown in gold, and those are the action plans that management indicated had not yet been implemented. I'll go into some further detail regarding the status, first starting with those that have been implemented. So the teal bars represent those where internal audit is currently in progress of validating those action plans. So we have sent out initial documentation requests to management. We are working through those requests that were provided back to us, selecting samples to perform testing, confirm any questions that we have with leadership as well. So there's about 100 and that we are actively in progress of testing right now. And then the dark blue bars represent those where we have completed our testing and validated that those action plans have been remediated by management. So there's about 21 that we have confirmed as remediated thus far as of last week. And then the bars in orange represent those where we have not yet started our validation and have not sent out our initial document requests yet. Those survey responses came in a bit later after our first round of document requests had gone out, so these will be sent out in our second round of requests. And we will continue working through the remaining items that are open. And this last visual here represents those that had not yet been implemented by management. And there are different aging buckets here represented for each audit. The days past the implementation date is calculated based upon the number of days that have elapsed since the original implementation date noted in the internal audit report in management's response. So there are 6 that are under a year old, 6 between 1 and 2 years, 4 between 3 and 4, or 2 and 3, and then 10 that are above 3 years since that original implementation date has passed. The primary reason that we heard from our discussions with management as to why some of these action plans have not yet been implemented were leadership transitions, staffing and turnover in the departments, or program restructuring. So these action plans were not carried forward during those personnel transitions that had happened. But now they are on management's radar to begin implementing. There are some where management has indicated that they plan to implement them even prior to the beginning of the next school year. So we will continue our diligence in following up with leadership to make sure that especially these aged action plans do get resolved and corrected, and continue following up with them to make sure that it remains in progress. So I will pause there for any questions.
Questions? I know I have some, but I will wait. I'm gonna look this. We're gonna start this way. We'll start with the experts.
Number one, this is a great section of the presentation because it's so important to see like what management self-reports as far as action remediation, and then this is a tough task to do on top of all the other audit priorities, just as a side note. One question I had in terms of the management action plans that were validated as remediated, were there any that you attempted to validate that maybe they had not fully implemented that were self-reported as implemented?
Yeah, those are still in progress. Those still kind of fall in our in progress bucket where we're going to do follow-ups with any questions. If we're seeing in the documentation that they initially provided to us that it looks like they may not have implemented all the aspects that they were supposed to, we are confirming that with them, and then we'll work with them to create a plan forward.
Okay, great. Don't have any other questions other than maybe when we get to the budget, revisiting the allocation of budget hours to these activities, and then kind of the approach to how you select which ones you're going to focus on validation. So.
So this question may be a little premature, but I'm thinking about, like, with leadership transition and different departments, how we're carrying over the plans from audits, the correction action plans, things that need to be done. Like, how are we ensuring that that information is transferred, and we're supporting making sure it happens no matter, who comes in and what changes happen, because leadership changes happen, staff changes happen.
They do. And one of the things, I try and pay attention to those changes. So if I realize a chief's change or an executive director's change, and if it's brought to my attention, I will call and remind them, hey, here's this audit report, here are these corrective action plans that management agreed to implement. That's what I would do. But I would think that there is a transition that takes place, if there's going to be a transition in leadership, that's a part of the transition. That's in every department, so I can't control that piece. But when I can and when I am aware of some changes, I try and put that information in front of them just as a reminder. I think the other thing is I have to be more conscious of following up, actually doing the follow-up work. We haven't been able to be as consistent as we had originally, so that's one of the plans too. I think the process that we have in place right now to continuously monitor it going forward, I think will help because there'll be no doubt probably within some of those departments that we're asking for what they're doing and when it's going to be implemented. So does that help?
It does, thank you. And I know there's one of you, and you're doing a lot. And then I'd love to hear from Dr. Battle too in terms of how, and that does help a lot, Connie.
Yep.
And I just want to add to it, Connie. I mentioned an additional step is Connie has been meeting with me. We have regularly scheduled meetings every month, and I'm included when she sends those corrective actions to the department, to the chiefs, to the executive directors. And when I have one-on-ones with those chiefs, those are my questions. Like, where are we with this finding? Where are we with that? And so we have sort of closed the loop. You know, Connie mentioned that was an issue and she was working on it, and so we've been working on that portion as well. And that's a part of my transition to the new superintendent would be to ensure that this continues.
And that was going to be my closing question. So thank you so much for ensuring that that practice continues, because we're seeing it make a difference. And I know it takes time, but that's critically important. Thank you both.
Ishay.
Yep, I think that answered my question. I appreciate that, Katie. I think I was more so wanting to know, like, how could we standardize that, standardize this process. So Dr. Battle, thank you for that. And that definitely, if there needs to be any changes or even heighten it for the transition in leadership, I think it would be key, almost like the transition checklist, that is like one that it becomes so standard that without question, even if there isn't a action plan or whatnot, there's a key routine to check with OIC. So I appreciate that.
And I would like to take it a step further. So I appreciate the fact that you all meet monthly. I would love a report back to us in terms of what does this look like, especially on the remediations. So if you guys are discussing this monthly, maybe a report back in terms of we were able to address 2 additional remediations in X department. But having that conversation, I believe, will stress that it's important, because the audit committee is important. We find high-risk items, but if there's not action that's done, then the work is pointless. And so I would love to add something to that process where we have remediation follow-up. The other thing I would like to ask about specifically, I guess the elephant on the page, is specifically the athletics department. It looks like they have very old remediations, and almost half of them. So I know we have new leadership. I want to stress it's very important that we address this, and that our leadership all the way down and up understands that this is important, because it does stand out. So is there anything in particular that you want to speak in regards to the athletics department and why it is that they seem to be an outlier?
Well, for one, as we completed that audit and we had corrective action plans, COVID hit. And I think the priorities changed. And when we came back, there were more leadership transitional changes at the chief level. So I think at one point it went back to the chief of schools, then it was assigned to an associate superintendent. Then I think at one point it was assigned to the chief of operations, and I think it's gone back to the school. So that, we can't discount all of that change. And in the mix, I think the corrective action plans got lost.
So not seeing the specifics of the actions, I know from our board meetings with students that athletics comes up often. And so this is important to our students, so it's also important to us that this be made a priority.
Okay.
And that we hear back in regards to what is the plan to address these 4-year-old remediations. Because COVID's gone,
It is.
and that's no longer an excuse.
And we have a new athletic director in place as well, too. I want to circle back because I want to make sure I understand your ask. The report out monthly, is that a report out to the audit committee, or is it directly to you?
The way it's done, we can, I will defer to you in
Okay.
terms of how it should be done, but I would like information shared.
Okay.
That we are looking at these remediations, work is being done, That's just what I want. I want that reassurance. So if you however you decide that should be done, we will also, if it doesn't come to the full committee, I'll share it with the full committee. But I think it's important that people understand that there is accountability behind these audits and not just show.
Okay,
Thank you.
fair enough.
Just really quickly for for clarity, well, not for clarity, just for a reminder, what was some of the findings from the athletics side? I know it's been a while. That's why.
I know documentation was an issue. I think initially there were some issues with completing some of the appropriate forms, parental forms, health forms, those types of things were the issues. But if you give me a minute, I can pull up the report because it's been several years and I don't know right off the top of my head unless you remember any of them, Brianna.
Yeah, you did bring up some of them with the eligibility documentation not being able to be provided for some of these samples selected in the original audit. There are also recommendations around athletics department providing oversight as well over the school athletic directors and their validation of student eligibility as well.
Okay.
So there were recommendations that were made in this area that just have not been done?
Yes.
Okay. And are there any technology changes that have happened? I know we've done stuff with our systems that might impact documentation.
I don't have an answer to that. I'm going to be honest. I'd have to check. I'd have to check.
So I believe there is a desire for more information
Okay.
in this area.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I know the system piece, I think that's like the ITP, I think that's for us to just kind of inquire in another department. So Connie, I appreciate appreciate you all emphasizing that. I think also what this just serves as a clear example for, like, I hate to say it, but stability and, like stability and, leadership and stability and systems are key. Because some things can get lost in the shuffle. So I think it's going to be important for us, I think, to Brian's point, in terms of the layout of just ensuring that this work is, like you point out, Ms. Connie, Ms. Brown, how it's going to be very, very important for a seamless transition in this space and really documenting that. So Dr. Bad, I appreciate you staying with us for help with this. Yeah. Thank you.
The only thing I'll add is having the information around what is not working. Like, is there an issue with them not having the resources they need to make the right changes? So us better understanding that from the budget perspective, like that's how this work is supposed to tie back. Like, I know they put in place Firefly or whatever it is to streamline putting in students' information for athletics. And I know it's been helpful, but then that's been a lift. That's been a significant change. It's been a lot of people power to make it happen because it was an adjustment for students and families. Like, all those things have an impact. But yeah, us getting those updates, because these are significant areas, if we need to better support it somehow to make sure it's more effective and efficient, getting that information from the superintendent to say, these are recommendations, so when you are looking at the budget, this could in the long run save you money because it'll become more efficient and actually be done too. So I appreciate us bringing all those pieces together so we better understand how we can best support.
Well, it's a good thing we have the budget chair in our committee, huh?
So when we provide the update, I'm not sure what that form's going to look like. One of the things I'll include is what those actual open items are so that you have some context to review. All right. Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, we're going to move to our next topic, which is our risk assessment and our proposed audit plan for 2025. And I know you said you were going to have some questions, Brian. So I'm going to welcome Matt.
All right, thanks, everybody. Hi, I'm Matt also with Plant Moran. So all really great discussion around remediation, and we'll tie this together when we share our draft audit plan for this coming year. But we'll start with the why, as we always do. Why is internal audit important to the district, right? We really do this risk assessment and this activity to identify key risks to the district through open discussion with management, with chiefs, et cetera. We ultimately want to find ways to monitor our internal controls, to manage down these risks, and really use internal audit as this effective vehicle for transparency, helping to identify, okay, where do we have some issues, where can we get better, and how do we design focused efforts toward that. So overall, our project, right, should look relatively familiar to how we presented this last year. We start with a risk assessment. This is data-driven through survey responses, as well as interviews with the chief, right? So we do this to help substantiate the information we received in the surveys, get a little bit of extra context, and some extra data points to help apply judgment in the analysis of our findings. Ultimately, complete this analysis that formulates an internal audit plan, as Connie had laid out here for 2024, the audit activities that we'll ultimately complete within a defined time period. Some themes that came out of the risk assessment. So we've categorized these here: financial reporting, staff development, legal and regulatory compliance. I'm not going to read through each bullet point on the slide here, but taking away from these themes, really looking at some inconsistency in documentation and training throughout the district, right? Often some disconnect between, what are we doing in a certain department versus what should we be doing? How do we empower the folks with the knowledge to be able to do things in accordance with district policy and acceptable practice, et cetera? And then really just some disparate tools throughout, right? Disparate systems, often seeing where we need workarounds to pull reports, get population, get information validated, things along. So we use these themes to ultimately inform prioritization in the audit plan. Oh, sorry. So risk assessment results, I'll jump to audit plan formulation here in a second. But heat map, similar to what we displayed last year, really this is a visual depiction of the risks as they've been assessed through this risk assessment. We use really a two-dimensional framework here. We assess each risk in terms of likelihood that this risk could manifest here at the district, as well as the impact that risk may have. That's what ultimately informs its placement here on this heat map and its placement there. Generally speaking, for all of these risks, all are high priority, and we have coverage between the school year 2024 audit plan as well as the 2025 plan. So we are getting good risk coverage across the board. What we try to do is organize these risks into logical units so that we can address multiple risks with one coordinated internal audit activity for efficiency purposes. Overall, just some considerations I'll highlight here. As we do have a great deal of scope for the district, right? We are contemplating about 5,400 hours here in summary in the plan to address all of these various risks. We don't necessarily have all those hours to work with, so what we try to do is get to something a little bit more concentrated, a little closer to 4,000 hours to address each of the risk areas, and that would include all of the internal audit activities that are performed throughout the year. So here's the summary internal audit plan for this year, right? Overall, organizing things into the governance, budget and spend, technology-oriented district staff, which will cover just staff retention, staff training, other employment area topics, families and students, which cover community engagement, student extracurricular activities, student services, transportation, et cetera. Again, this is examples of how we try to organize risks into logical units. Compliance-oriented activities, business continuity, which is essentially our DRP plan, people audit around termination and payroll management. We do leave room in the budget, the hours budget for special projects, right? So if we do field requests from any of the chiefs, particular area that we need to shift some focus to, we do have flexibility to do that, address that. So we did allocate about 250 hours for special projects that can be modified and scaled as needed. And ultimately, we do have some consideration in here for corrective action plan follow-up, these matters that we were discussing here just a few moments ago, and then the overall, some time for next year and the risk assessment refresh for next year's audit. So from a linear timeline standpoint, this is what we are proposing for this year. Again, organizing those into summary units, and this is how we'll generally allocate our activities over the course of the hours that we think we have to execute these audits. One thing I'll highlight in there is the corrective action plan, which is on the lower third of the page. You will see here, this is a continuously shaded item. So the intent here is to continue monitoring remediation action plans from prior year internal audit activities, as well as anything that we roll on from, you know, this recent audit year and anything that we'll find here coming up. So we hear you loud and clear. We can help to formulate those monthly report outs. We're happy to help, you know, design a good mechanism for reporting, but we are going to be continuing to look at these items throughout the year. This may be a good spot for me to pause. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the plan as it's currently drafted, timing of activities, focus of activities, anything like that?
Quick question, just a formatting question.
Sure.
Forgive me. The shaded areas mean that it will be an audit or it's already covered? Just for clarity on that.
The shaded areas represent the linear timeline in which we're proposing the audit activity to take place.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at this one.
Prior
Nope,
slide.
yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, the ones that aren't shaded, those are the proposed specific audit areas that translate to the next page?
Yeah, so
Okay.
so ultimately, for things like governance risk, financial reporting risk, budget and finance, those are risk areas that will be addressed via a partial audit unit. So we've identified some risk factors, not all of which we'll be able to address as planned. So we're trying to identify the highest priority ones and make sure that those are addressed in the audit plan.
Okay, thanks
Yeah.
for that clarification.
I appreciate this, Tom. Just one question, and this is also going to the same slide that Brian was pointing out. Just thinking about as we are, the most simple, the simplest one was the compliance piece, particularly with food and nutrition. Knowing that we're bringing that in-house, just a general question, what is the standard like audit schedule or plan for that?
So I'll take that.
Yep.
It did roll out as high during our risk assessment.
Yeah.
But I realized we're in the process of setting up a huge function. And I made the call. I didn't think it would be value add to come in while they're trying to set up. I know they spent this year getting ready, and school year 25 is going to be the first year. They're still going to be working through things. I didn't think it was a good idea for audit to be in their department. So I'm almost positive that school year 2026,
Okay.
nutrition is probably going to be
Okay.
on the plan.
Yep. You said it's going to be on the plan?
Probably 2026,
Yeah.
if it's approved by the audit committee. But I
Yeah.
didn't think now was a good time to go in and do any work in that area while they're trying to still set it up.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. That's why I was asking, like, knowing that you have this huge transition of a huge system, what is the standard? So, what, like 2026 or?
I would think
Okay.
school year 2026.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
Again, might be premature more for our folks. ERP, will that help? And like, it's going to take time to put in that new system, but will that help with like number one, risk, financial reporting, like the issues we're having to adjust for things that Lawson's unable to do?
Absolutely, I think it will help. I mean, you have to consider people too, so you can have the greatest system, but if people aren't ready, if people aren't trained, you're still gonna have the same issues. So I guess the answer to your question is yes. A new system, I think, will help the district across the board.
Right, because this one seems to be creating more issues, like more people hours have to be spent. But yeah, I hear you on the training, absolutely. But going back to findings here, taking them back to what we need to do to make sure we have effective and efficient systems and that we support it.
So yeah, I would say to your question, yes, the system is gonna be instrumental and very important.
And what we can do with updates on the ERP, because we're going to be asking for those, is say, okay, how is that impacting these high area, what maybe this issue right here, financial reporting, you know, as it's rolled out. But I'm flagging this for
Okay.
us in those updates. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question in regards to, it's on a couple sides, but slide 15, where it breaks down the hours. You have the total internal audit plan hours at 5,400, total staffed hours at 4,000, and then there's a line of unstaffed hours excluded from the audit plan. What are those? How are they funded, or who's doing it? Like, what is that unstaffed hours excluded from audit plan? What is that?
Those are areas that we are not gonna cover off on, just like a lot of other departments, we have to prioritize. And one of the things that came out of a review, I want to say it was our quality assessment, is they encouraged me to present everything that falls out of the risk assessment, but we know we can't touch everything that falls out of that risk assessment. But just so the committee is aware that there's lots of things to cover, but we have to prioritize, and we won't be able to catch everything every year. So that's what that line is.
So not doing the math, these numbers, hours by audit unit full capacity, those add up to what? That's everything that we're doing, and this number is not included, or?
Correct, that's like the 40-45, correct?
Correct. The column-oriented hours, 210, 1,200, 700, et cetera, those add up to the 5,400. So if we were to cover everything that we've assessed, it'd be that 5,400. We take the staffing capacity, allocate the headcount that we have, the hours that we have available, that's the 4,000. Did I answer your question?
You kind of confused me a little bit more. So I'm just trying to understand, is the work that is included in that 1,400, is that listed in this total?
Yeah.
So you're basically saying this is the work that could be done, but 1,400 hours of this work is not going to be done?
Correct. These would be risks or risk factors that we don't have the man hours to necessarily address. So what we need to do is prioritize and take, risk factors that may categorically be similar, then go into these homogeneous audit units, apply those, and address those higher priority risks. So something may have come out in the risk assessment as important, but we need to ultimately use judgment to prioritize what are the higher value areas that we address. That's what we're doing with the 4,000 hours.
So almost a quarter of this stuff that's listed here may not happen, or you're just going to do it differently to make it happen? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
We'll do it differently, right? So we will take a look at higher priority areas. Maybe it'd be good if I go to an example.
I guess the net I'm
Yeah.
trying to understand
think
is
it's
how
slide
will we
16.
know what's not going to be covered if it's
Yeah.
all being shown to us as being covered, but you added the caveat that, well, we can't do 1,400 of these
Right.
hours.
Right. So if we take a look at our budget and spend audit, particularly the financial reporting piece that's come up a couple times, we may have identified a number of risk factors in financial reporting, some of which we'll have to deprioritize relative to others. So when we take a look at things like financial reporting, we may have to emphasize completeness and accuracy of key reports, right? Reports that are used in chief or management decision-making, but there are other reports that may not be key, still important, but we may have to take those, put those aside and not do an assessment on management's procedures to make sure those are complete and accurate when they're using.
So that will be done in the scope, like before you actually go into the audit, you'll figure out,
Correct.
okay.
Correct. So when we scope out an individual audit, we make sure we hit the highest value areas so that
Okay.
we're delivering key results, key recommendations to help drive important.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for that rabbit hole, but I needed to understand.
No, that's certainly fair, and I mean, we don't have it necessarily delineated in here because this is deliberately brief, it's summary form. Ultimately, if we do need to get to that level of detail, we certainly can produce that as an output of our risk assessment. It's just as supplementary information. It's data-driven, we have that available and can ultimately provide that if needed.
And they work directly with you in your office, correct, in terms of
Yes.
finalizing what those top priorities and risk are?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Done. So that's our presentation for our proposed audit plan for 2025. So at this point, I'd like approval to move forward with this plan starting July 1st from the committee.
Are there any concerns, questions? My only concern is that remediation and remediation follow-up is not one of the things that is included in those hours that you can't do.
It
That's a
actually is.
prioritized item.
It's in there, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it's in there, so.
Well, everything's listed, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just making sure that it's not one of the things that is cut or
Correct.
minimized.
And so what we're asking for approval is this here in front of you, which the corrective action follow-up, the remediation is there, that continuous
That's the
band down the lower
continuous
third.
shaded.
Right, these are the priority areas that we're asking for approval to proceed, with the caveat that, again, we do this with flexibility, right? If we need to move some things around for changing business conditions, we certainly have the ability to do that.
So is this just a verbal okay, Nina? What is this? It's a vote. It's a vote? Oh. Is there a motion to approve the internal audit plan for 24-25?
Second.
It has been moved by Board Member Collins and seconded by Board Member Howard. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Motion carries.
Thank you. We'll get started right away. Okay, July 1st.
We're toggling to a different presentation at this point, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
But at this point, I want to jump in before we get into our audit presentations to talk about an extension for Earl Fagan, who's been one of our community advisors since 2019. I did have conversations with him. I don't believe Earl is on the call today. He is? Oh, okay.
I'm here. I'm here,
Hello,
Connie.
Earl. How are you?
Great.
So,
How are you? How's everything?
his support and his insight's been very valuable. So I would like to recommend that we extend him as a community advisor for another year. So that's my recommendation to the audit committee.
Is that as long as it can be extended?
No, it's not.
I'm just curious. Okay, is there a motion to approve the extension of our community advisor, Earl Fagan?
So moved.
It has been moved and seconded and third. It's been moved by Board Member Collins, seconded by Board Member Howard. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Earl, you are with us for another year. We appreciate you.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you.
So for the next section, we're going to actually move into our audit report presentations. We're going to start with our school audits. This was our first year where we actually got to complete all the schools in a given year. Before we start them, before I ask Yvonne, who's online, to join us and share out the results, our school audit, the work was completed. We do have management responses. However, we were not able to get them before our cutoff for this meeting. So once this meeting is over, we will go back and will evaluate those responses, and we will then finalize the report. But I did not want to wait potentially another 3 months to share these results. So I'm going to ask Yvonne Claiborne, who is a partner with Carr, Riggs, and Ingrams, to walk us through the presentation.
Thanks, Connie. Am I sharing my screen or can everybody see the presentation?
Sorry, I need the clicker. Well, Yvonne, do you want to go ahead and share your screen then?
Sure, I can do that.
We'll do it that way.
It says sharing's not turned on.
I'm sorry.
It says sharing's not turned on.
Try again for me. And
There we go. All right. And there we go.
are you able to do it? Because if not, you can just
Can
tell.
everybody see it now?
No.
Hmm. Let's see.
Okay, we see it now.
Okay. All right.
Oh, wait a minute. That's us.
Is that it?
I see page 1 of your presentation.
Okay, so you're seeing, okay.
We see it.
Let me get let me back out a second here. I'm gonna go back to, hang on there. Let me,
So hold on one second for me, Yvonne. For our
Yeah.
IT team, we're trying to get her presentation is not showing on the screen. So we see, I think what we're seeing on the screen is what you guys posted. I think it's getting ready to share now. So now we see your main screen, Yvonne.
okay.
While she's doing that, Connie, just let you know that this is Rob Rowley.
Okay, there you go.
But
All right.
you're seeing mine with my
Yes,
notes.
we're
right?
there now.
Hang on, I gotta go to the other screen. I'm trying to figure out where it's moving around, where it's gonna show up. Sorry. I apologize for technical difficulties here. Let's see.
There should be a button, Yvonne, where you could hit switch. There you go.
All right, are you seeing it now? Just the
Yes.
screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Wow,
Yep, got it.
that was a
Any-
labor of love.
Hey, Yvonne, before you get started, Connie, just let you know this is Rob Rowley, and I'm also on the call with Yvonne.
Okay, hang on, there you go. All right. So I was gonna pull up my report too at the same time, but it's confusing my screens. All right, so thank you for having us today. As Connie mentioned, we don't have we're just now going over the responses. We received the first round of responses and we went back and revisited, so we're looking at that now. So the year ended that we looked at was June 30, 2023. There were 62 schools that had the internal accounts, and we'll call them the student activity accounts instead of the miscellaneous cash activity accounts because it's a long title. So one of the schools we were able to do a site visit. There was one school, there were issues with the documentation, and so we weren't able to perform a site visit at that school, and Connie's office is going to be handling some instances there. Of the 61 schools, we had 322 instances of noncompliance, keeping in mind that sometimes an instance of noncompliance might have, like one test transaction may have multiple instances of noncompliance. For example, we selected a check disbursement for testing. It didn't have the pre-approved request form, and it was also missing documentation. So it could have been one item with multiple instances of noncompliance, but overall 322. Broken out, 61% of the schools had 5 or more findings, and then it went down from there. 4 and 3 findings were tied at 10%. 2 findings and below, around 6 to 7% of the schools had 2 or less findings. Broken out by school type, this isn't a surprise, really just based on the number of the amount of activity. Of course, your high schools are going to have the most activity, and by and large, it looks like the schools are doing a good job of maintaining balances pretty equitably. In other words, what they're bringing in for the current fiscal year seems to be pretty much what they're sending out during the current fiscal year. So, you know, we do like to see the revenues going out because, again, these are being collected for a specific purpose. What we don't want to see is that they're holding excess amounts of revenues over a long period of time. And for the most part, the schools are maintaining pretty reasonable cash balances. So again, the most common finding we had was monies not turned in timely at 52% of the schools, or missing or incomplete student receipts. The pre-authorization request form that I just mentioned briefly as an example, which is for cash disbursements, was either missing or not completed correctly in 51% of the findings, and then missing or incomplete documentation, again, in 48% of the schools for cash disbursements. Sponsored training, signed sponsorship agreements, 44% of the schools had issues with that. Improper segregation of duties, which is kind of one of the biggies, is a 33%. The request for fundraising project forms, again, 25% of the schools had compliance issues there. And then purchasing policies not followed in 23%. And stale, dated, and outstanding checks at 18% of the school. And the reason we look at that is there's some state laws around that too. And so while we were out there, we were looking at compliance with the state law, escheatment laws as well. So our first observation is that during our testing, we noted that the procedures manual hasn't been updated since June of 2018. You know, as a result of COVID, a lot has happened in between 2018 and 2023. A lot of the policies and procedures have morphed and evolved out of a need for things that have changed as a result of COVID. And the school district has been updating kind of on an ad hoc basis through a SharePoint site, but not actually officially updating the manual. When we set up our audit procedures, we set them up using the manual because those are the official policies and procedures of the district, the ones that have been approved by the board. So again, a lot of that non-compliance had to do with some things that might have changed, but the policies and procedures haven't caught up with those changes in the procedures. So as a result, those procedures that are described in the manual aren't always in alignment with what actually is going on out at the school sites. And our recommendation is for a update to the policies and procedures manual, and so that they can better have a resource to look for compliance. Segregation of duties, again, 39% of the schools had one or more instances in which the secretary or bookkeeper collected the funds and also entered the transactions into the accounting system. You know, proper segregation of duties is pretty essential in trying to ensure that we have as much protection as we can for these funds that are coming in. In the annual training that's going to be provided to the secretaries, there should be an emphasis on maintaining that proper segregation of duties. It's a challenge, especially at elementary schools and your alternative schools, because you have limited resources and secretaries are often doing more than one function. There's school secretaries and they're acting as bookkeepers. But again, because there's that's not an insurmountable obstacle. There are ways around that, and we're encouraging the district, you know, as much as possible to segregate those functions. And again, the principals should be looped in, and we think that school leadership ultimately has responsibility for appropriate segregation and overlapping duties to make sure that those don't exist. 44% of the schools did not have documentation of sponsor attendance or that they're training. There's a couple or signed sponsorship agreements. There's a couple of reasons this is super key is, again, the sponsors are the first line of what collection for the most part of what's coming in from the students. And again, if they don't understand the rules, it's going to kind of hard for them to follow the rules. So sponsorship training is essential. And again, we're saying that if you make it's only required the first time the sponsor becomes a sponsor, but we're saying that if there's going to be major revisions to the policies and procedures, all sponsors should be asked to go through training again to make sure they're updated on all the policy changes. The signed sponsorship agreement not only is the way to acknowledge that they understand what they're accepting responsibility for, it's also documentation that they have been issued a receipt book to use, an official receipt book to use in collection. Without that signed sponsorship agreement, we can't guarantee that the sponsors are even receiving those receipt books. Because it's hard to say, did they get the receipt book and they didn't use it, or did they not get the receipt book? And if you don't have that signed receipt book, it's there's no documentation to clarify really what had happened there. 33% of the schools had one or more instances where journal entries were not accompanied by supporting documentation. 64% had instances in which receipts were not properly supported, and 11% had one or more instances in which the disbursements were not properly supported. With all of that, again, a clear audit trail is essential, especially with the journal entries and the receipts, and the disbursements. Those are all key transactions, especially with the journal entries. If all we have is an entry in the file that says they transferred from one fund to another, the basis for doing that and the intent and all that went into making the decision process about why that transfer was made is lost. And if there's no institutional knowledge, so say the bookkeeper has moved on to a new school or the principal has moved on to a new school, that institutional knowledge isn't there. It's really hard to say sometimes whether or not the transfer was appropriate. Again, with the student receipts, it's without the documentation. We can't tell whether or not the receipts are complete. We can't tell if they're posted accurately. There's a lot of missing components. And so it's essential that all of the receipts have the documentation that's required by your policies and procedures. And again, with the disbursements, same thing. The chart of accounts doesn't distinguish between restricted accounts and discretionary accounts. Where this came into being is there's one donation account, and that donation account is being used by the schools for discretionary and restricted donations. So when transfers are being made or those funds are being used to pay for items, it's difficult to tell whether or not restricted donations are being protected for the purpose for which they were collected. So we're advising that, the restricted donations be accounted for separately from discretionary donations. If there's some consistency that can be provided by providing some additional guidance within the manual, that would really help. These accounts are restricted for certain purposes. And again, letting the schools know these funds here are the only ones that are available for discretionary spending. That way there's no question when they're going to make transfers for something other than a restricted purpose, that they know where they can use those funds. We don't have a consistent process right now for a documentation of verification of count of funds. The district has a receipts collection form, but it only had one line for someone to sign as received by, but there was no place for a second signature. Additionally, if there were student receipts as part of the support, there was no requirement for the receipt collection form, and there's no place for documentation of a two-count process. So it's essential that when somebody brings money into the secretary or bookkeeper and that sponsor brings that money in, the sponsor has signed that form saying, I have counted this money and this is how much I'm bringing you. And the bookkeeper counts it in the presence of the sponsor and then signs off saying, yes, I agree, that's an amount. Because if that doesn't take place, what happens is if there's a change to that amount or it doesn't agree to the supporting documentation, it's unclear where it went wrong. So did the sponsor not bring in a right amount, or did the bookkeeper, did something happen once it got into the bookkeeper's office? At that point in time, if you don't have that documentation, it's really just a he said, she said, she said, she said. So it's difficult to say, you can't protect the collection process without that 2-point verification. And then the outdated training materials, when we did a search for the training materials, the only materials we found were from 2018. The district has a SharePoint site that they have been using, and they've uploaded the current training to that website. But that's not readily available. Our point being is that, you want to make sure that the resources for these secretaries and bookkeepers readily available to them throughout the year. And if there's outdated materials out there, it becomes confusing. So we wanted to make sure that the outdated materials got archived and that the updated materials were provided on a spot that all secretaries and bookkeepers can get to it readily, and that they are provided information, and reminded these materials are here for you. So if you need help and support, here's where you go. Because again, you do the training at the beginning of the year, they've got a lot of other things on their plate. Sometimes that reinforcement of this is where the materials are, this is where you can go if you have questions, will help ensure that they feel like they have the support they need to comply with the policies and procedures. And that's kind of the high level summary of a really large report.
Thank you. Questions?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Go to Earl next.
I will make a comment, like when I was reading this, the one thing I thought of, and it may be a poor analogy, is like the P card.
Right?
Because it, in fairness to everybody, this is just a huge monster of a process, or lack thereof in some cases. So as I read it, and as a APS parent myself, and thinking about like, well, when have I participated in this? As far as like, as a parent, you get different requests for money, and you make payments, and some may be an app, some may be manual. And so I was just thinking through, what's the firsthand experience, both from the parent and the teacher and the administration, and but I think the issues and the recommendations are, sensible, logical in this case. I think the key thing, of course, since 2018, so much has changed that, what is the right solution for this? And so I think that's going to be something that will be interesting conversation in terms of, is it technology, is it in-person staff, you name it, but where you start is a big question as well. So, thanks.
Thank you. This is definitely a monster. I'm going to go to Earl. Any questions online, Earl?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
I
sir.
can.
Great, thanks Yvonne for that report. I'm just curious, when you, like in the earlier slides, around 4, 5, and 6, where we talked about money's not turned in timely, and that was a pretty large percentage. Concern, findings around cash disbursements, and then also the purchasing policies. Are there any particular trends that you all picked up on that might be indicative of a more systemic problem where we might be able to target and provide some remediation?
We've talked a lot about how do you ensure compliance out at the schools. So a lot of our recommendations included, we talk a lot about training, and when we talk about training, we talk a lot about how the principals need to be engaged in the training, because ultimately it's the tone at the top that they set at the individual schools. In other words, if a principal is adamant to make sure that all the sponsors go through the training, if the principal supports the school secretary or bookkeeper to make sure that when you have a sponsor that's not turning in timely, that the bookkeeper can say, hey, I need help here. I need to get this sponsor on track. We need to make sure this is coming in timely. That really goes a long way if they understand how important it is for compliance to help provide for those compliance. But systemically, I think I saw a lot of things that we commonly see out at the schools. It just seems that because there's been kind of a period of time where there hasn't been any accountability, or not a lot of accountability, there's been kind of a relaxing of it. And so we just need to reinvigorate the importance of compliance.
Got you. And I don't disagree with that. Those are very valid points. I just want to, make a position that, what we're talking about is, suitable and dependable controls. And I just want to be careful that training is great, everyone, but training is not a control.
Right.
So we need to be thinking about the controls in place to prevent and mitigate things like money's being turned in late, and making sure we have the proper purchasing policies being followed. So
Right. And it's hard, because a lot of times you can't, and again, that's why the 2-point verification is important, because that's really for the protection of the school secretary. And make sure that, if a sponsor's not doing their job, then we have the documentation to say that controls in place to say the sponsor really is not doing their job. That they need to make sure that they're getting that money in there. And so if there's, things come up missing, it's really easy when you have that 2-point verification to kind of narrow down where is the issue and how do we close that gap.
Okay, our CFO is actually here and she stepped up to the podium. So Lisa, did you have some comments?
Great, thank you. Yes, good morning, Chair Baldwin, members of the committee. As always, we really appreciate Connie and her team. We have not had these school audits in quite a few years, and so it's been very eye-opening for our teams about what we think we're doing right, but maybe isn't landing. So we think we're constantly training and providing checklists, but it's in a variety of different places. It's on LS, a SharePoint site. So we're pulling all of those together to put in one place. And I will say that the timing on this is perfect because we're doing our summer training for our bookkeepers on July 12th. And so we plan to have the manual updated by that date and all of that training consolidated into the SharePoint site by that date in preparation for day one, so that we are starting next year with all of these in place. The only other piece I wanted to lift around the accountability, Tommy and I have already been working together on a principals checklist so that the principals can meet with their bookkeeper once a month and sit down and say, these are the things that we want to make sure that you're doing, bookkeeper, we know you've been trained on. And then that will even go up to the principal supervisor so that when the associates are in the schools, they are also looking at that checklist. Again, just bringing in more accountability and sunshine into this process. And so I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that. And I appreciate you letting us get our responses in too.
Accountability and sunshine are great. Fellow board members, do you have any questions? Katie?
This is great to hear plan of action and streamlining things. I also think about just how our schools are different sizes and staffing is different. Like some schools that are larger have a business manager or are able to do that with their budget. Some do not. And knowing that some people are going to have multiple duties, and we talked about segregation of duties, how are we getting, I don't want to use the word necessarily creative because it needs to be very exact, but supporting folks, and some people have to do a lot of different jobs.
Yeah, that's been a real challenge for us in the way that you're stating it and the exact opposite, right? So we have some schools where there's one bookkeeper and they are doing everything. We have some schools where the financial duties are spread across a business manager, a secretary, a bookkeeper. So when we're training and we try to figure out, well, which person on your staff is the timekeeper versus the one that's in charge of SABO versus the one that's doing procurement, right? Because they might delegate duties across multiple roles in the school. And so we've also talked about this will be a longer term solution, but heading into FY 2026, is there an opportunity for us to standardize who and how the financials are managed within the school, and even potentially updating job descriptions to require a little bit more expertise or skill set for the people who are being hired into these positions? Because as we mentioned, it could be a secretary that, as a principal secretary, that's also managing accounting that may not have an accounting background. So our training might not be sufficient for that person, but might be redundant for somebody that's a business manager and has a degree in accounting, right? So we're trying to also figure out the best way to train and support a variety of people in every school that have different skill sets. So that's a longer term solution.
And I appreciate that. And that's the creative piece right there. And, seeing how that develops further with leadership of, principals included and superintendent. And I want to recognize Dr. Johnson in the audience. I'm glad he's here. This is the best committee next to budget, just saying. Keep it moving. No, but all that, like developing out, appreciate y'all looking at that, because there's a reality here. In a perfect world, we have that person who has these exact skills at every single school, but that's just not the reality. And it's not fair to put additional duties on folks who don't have that support all the way. So thank you. And we'll be monitoring that from this committee too to see how that works out.
Isha?
I appreciate this, because I served on, Brian and I, we were on the audit committee in 2018 at that time when we were looking at this and some of these key pieces in place. And so I think for me is, what will be good, I know you said there was going to be a training July 12th, and so there's parts of, the manual revision, some of those key pieces. I think my question for clarity is it something that the board policy committee needs to approve or adopt? I think it's an internal process, but just wanted to make sure we don't have any responsibility in that regards.
I don't believe it's
Yeah.
something that the board should get involved in. I think these are procedures, internal procedures for Lisa's team.
Okay.
Lisa, I'll
Yeah.
defer to you.
It's the really weedy stuff. It's the
Yep.
procedures, and so we need to make sure that we are updating that, but I don't think it rises to policy. I will say that, I mentioned the July 12th training, but we do have an opportunity to get back on the principals' agendas. We haven't been on principals' agendas in quite some time. And so I will be following up with the principals on July 18th at their regularly scheduled principals meeting to unpack what we've just trained their bookkeepers on, again, so that they can start preparing for that. And then we're preparing a suite of training for principals on a monthly basis, just virtual training, 1-hour sessions that are with a specific topic in mind on a monthly basis throughout the course of the year, and developing that full calendar out so they can know, again, just making sure that the principals understand their roles and how it's different and equal to the bookkeepers in their schools.
Thank you for your recommendations and for your questions. Ishay, I was actually going to ask about that in regards to what was the responsibility for the policy committee around that. And I'm going to agree that this is the best committee. And but we have a strong committee because we've got the chair of the policy committee on this committee. We have the chair of the budget committee and me, right? And so that just means that we can actually pick these things up and run with them and have some accountability and sunshine, as you said, around this. I want to acknowledge that we have Board Chair Erica Mitchell here, who has joined us, and Board Member Howard did mention that Dr. Brian Johnson is also here joining us in the audience. We appreciate you coming and joining us because, as I said, this is the best committee. We get to lift up the hood and see what's going on and make recommendations to make us better. So, I mean, hey, it's the best.
One other.
Another question?
Yep, just really
Let's
quick.
go.
Yep, just really quickly for clarity. So as some of these new pieces that you talked about, Dr. Bracken, are coming, or I guess coming online, thinking about the audit plan that we just approved, making sure that I'm clear, from slide 16 from the previous presentation, it's in that shaded area, so it'll be a continuous monitoring piece
Yes.
of this? Okay.
Our plan next year is to do all the schools every year, and I think that consistency is going to add to
That'd be
the
very helpful.
effectiveness as well. So we're going to continue to do that.
Great, thank you so much.
And
And
just to add.
Connie, Connie and I have discussed that, again, for fiscal year '24, since we weren't out there until probably midway to 3/4 of the way through the school year, we don't anticipate significant improvement between '23 and '24.
Right.
We really think that the improvement should start to appear in the '25 audit.
Got it. Great, thank
That's
you.
exactly what I was about to say.
And Madam Chair,
Because now that it's identified, and they're always looking at the previous year, then it will be the following year.
Madam Chair, I just want to acknowledge that we do have Roland Edwards as well, another community
Yes,
advisor.
Roland.
Not
do you
that he
have-
had any questions, but I just wanted to acknowledge he was present.
But now that you've mentioned it, I was actually about to go to him. Roland, do you have any questions in this area before we move on?
Yeah, I appreciate it in the oversight and also providing the different points that many have already mentioned. I don't have anything to add at this point, but underscore the importance of it all. But thank you for allowing me the opportunity.
And another reason why this is the best committee, because we have experts on our committee as well.
Yvonne and Rob, thank you for your time today, and I'm sure we're going to be in touch soon.
right.
At this time, we're going to move forward with our next report out on the Office of Employee Performance and Experience. If Brianna and Caroline, all right, cool.
Thanks, Connie.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And we will need to go back to the Plant Moran presentation. Do you have the clicker? Oh.
Okay, so next we're going to share the results of the Office of Employee Experience and Performance internal audit that we performed. We first wanted to start off with the objectives and scope of the audit. So we evaluated the OEMP function for the period of the 2022-2023 school year, and our objectives included an evaluation of policies and their alignment with relevant state and federal regulations, as well as the division's procedures, their alignment with district policy, and the current practices in place. And we focused on the areas of complaints, grievances, civil service hearings, Title IX investigations involving employees as a respondent, and employee well-being programs. In addition to our policy and procedure review, we facilitated interviews with the executive director of OEMP to obtain an understanding of the process, and we also performed sample-based testing of investigations handled by the employee relations team. We identified internal controls through our audit to facilitate accurate case reporting, timeliness of reporting, and also monitoring activities. And we identified gaps and recommendations to mitigate risk to the district, which we will share in our findings section. Wanted to share a few of the themes that we noted throughout the audit first. So the first item we wanted to note was there were leadership transitions that occurred during the 22-23 school year, and those transitions and changes in team composition did lead to a series of improvements for document retention, process improvements, and also oversight that was initiated before we began our audit. So we did want to highlight the work that had already gone in by the OEMP team prior to us coming and performing this. Secondly, the next theme was that OER did not have effective processes in place to maintain case oversight during the 22-23 school year. The tracking process for cases was very manual, which did lead to some data integrity issues and also did not allow for effective monitoring. And in July of 2023, they did implement the HR Acuity Case Management System to begin to facilitate improvement in oversight. And then lastly, standard operating procedures did not exist for employee well-being, and the guidelines for investigations, case outcomes, and determination of disciplinary actions were not comprehensive or consistent in all sources in guidelines from the OER team. We had 12 total findings from our audit, 5 that were high priority and 7 that were moderate priority, and I'll go into detail on those here next. So our first high priority finding was that there were not standard operating procedures for employee relations that were comprehensively detailed, included all aspects of the timelines that the team were working to achieve, practices for notifying and sending letters to complainants and respondents, also monitoring procedures and maintaining documentation around the case. So our recommendation was for them to update their standard operating procedures to reflect all aspects of their process, including these items. Next, during our sample-based testing, we had noted that there were not required approvals obtained for all case investigation reports that we had inspected. There are certain levels of approval that those investigation reports should obtain from management. So our recommendation was, now that they have HR acuity, to document those approvals in the system, perform monitoring to ensure all levels of review are completed, and to also document the specific review procedures that management is performing when reviewing case investigation reports in their standard operating procedures. Next finding, as I mentioned, they're maintaining a manual log of cases during the 22-23 school year. So this log was not complete and accurate with all the cases that may have been handled by the OER team during that testing period. So now that they have the HR acuity system, we recommended that they define responsibility for entering cases, maintaining all aspects of the documentation used in that case, and maintaining case status in the system. And then we also recommended that there be a backup identified as well for performing those activities should someone be out of office for any period of time. And next, there were not any written guidelines during the 22-23 school year to promote the consistency of recommended remediation or disciplinary actions that were provided to respondents. OER did begin to draft a guidebook during the 23-24 school year, and our recommendation was for them to ensure that that guidebook comprehensively includes all types of allegations handled by the OER team and all recommended disciplinary or remedial actions based on the allegation and based on the disciplinary history. Next, in our sample-based testing of cases, we noted that case documentation was not always complete. There were some instances where letters were missing, some instances of case investigation reports that were not in the files, or evidence not retained in the files. So our recommendation was for, once investigations are completed, a final review be performed of the case documentation to ensure that all of the letters, all of the evidence, everything referenced in the investigation report is retained in the system. And moving on to our moderate priority findings. First, there was a page on the OER website titled Employee Incident Investigation Procedures, and the procedures on this website did not align with the practices of OER. So recommendation was for them to update the website to align with their practices and include any revised items that were the result of our recommendations in this report. Next, the case record retention period noted on the aforementioned website did not align with the district's record retention schedule. So our recommendation was for OEMP to work with general counsel to align on a record retention period, and for that period to be reflected on the website, and also the district's retention schedule once that was established. Next, complaint investigations were not always completed within the 45-day timeline that was established by OER. So our recommendation is, should an investigation exceed that timeline that is established, Communication with the complainant and respondent should be retained and documented in the HR acuity system. Additionally, the OER director began a weekly monitoring process as well during the 23-24 school year to ensure that cases are closed in a timely manner, and we recommended that these weekly monitoring procedures be reflected in their updated standard operating procedure. Next, a structured training plan was not in place for OER investigators. So our recommendation was for this plan to be established, and there be a plan for both existing investigators on an annual basis and also new investigators brought onto the team. Additionally, we had a recommendation to conduct a trend analysis over cases such as types of allegations in certain clusters, case outcomes, volume of cases, to use that to inform any specific training needs that may be needed for investigators. Next finding, remedial actions that were provided to the respondent were not monitored to ensure that the respondent actually completed those remedial actions in a timely manner. Our recommendation was for there to be that oversight over the completion of remedial actions assigned by the OE&P team, and evidence of completion of remedial actions should be retained. And there were investigators who were performing this oversight, but our recommendation was also for this potentially to be transitioned to the business analyst instead, so investigators can keep their focus on investigations. And the last recommendation for this finding was to document that process for tracking remedial actions and obtaining evidence of those remedial actions in their procedures. Next, there were no written standard operating procedures that documented employee well-being processes. Our recommendation was for those processes to be documented in procedures over tracking enrollment in well-being programs, maintaining confidentiality of employee data gathered, monitoring employee satisfaction with well-being programs and offerings, and prevention of APS Flex program abuse. And then the last finding is that data around employee well-being, enrollment, and satisfaction was not being tracked. So a recommendation was, when possible, to track enrollment electronically versus on paper attendance sheets at different well-being events. And then also a recommendation was to analyze survey data around employee satisfaction with those programs to identify opportunities to improve health, morale, productivity, or retention of employees. And we obtained management responses for this report. So management will work to implement the agreed upon action plans by the implementation dates they provided. And a lot of these implementation dates, based on the implementation dates, we expect to begin remediation activities over some of the findings for this audit during the 24-25 school year.
And Brianna, before you, one of the things I want to comment too about this report is we did have a lot of findings, but one of the things we found was that the new team was already working on most of the implementation items. So that's why it's going to be easier for us to actually follow up in the upcoming school year, because most of it was already done by the time we finished our audit. So they were already thinking about it. So I do want to comment on that. And I know that the Chief Human Resource Officer is here. Nicola, did you want to say a few things before we open for questions?
Thank you, Connie. Yes, I do want to provide context. It's important to know the testing year was 2022, 2023. Immediately when I began the role, January 2022, employee relations was a red flag area. And I like to call it a trifecta. We had people issues, process issues, as well as system support. So we focused on getting the structure right and the right people in the seats. I believe ISIS started October of 2022, December of 2022. And by that time, we had already identified the need for a case management system. Cases were being kept on Excel spreadsheets, which didn't allow us the opportunity to monitor, assess trends, determine where we need to invoke training points within the organization. So within that year, we not only got the right staff members in the seat, we implemented a case management system, and we also set policies and procedures so that when we implemented the system, we had a process that worked for the district. I'm happy to report that we now know how many cases we have, the trends, and that they have all closed within 30 days, I believe was the target that we had, and we met that for this school year.
Thank you for clarifying the timing and the transition. That was my first question that I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of, is how that leadership transition aligned with the audit time period. So I appreciate that. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Don't feel free, feel free not to have it. No, I'm just kidding. We do have some additional work to do. I believe we're going to go over. So thank you all for your patience.
And I second that, and just like knowing also ethics complaints you receive, Connie, that, they go over to OER, like this is such a critical area
Yes.
and that follow-up. So looking forward to seeing these things develop and how we can further support them.
Absolutely. Looking forward to reporting out as we continue to build our processes.
And there's an opportunity, right, for us to get this right.
Yeah.
And for this office to be the culture that we want to see throughout the district, right?
Yes.
I believe that y'all can be an exemplar.
Yes.
And if we get it right here, that it will spread, if
Yes.
you will.
We unpacked a lot in the structure piece itself. So the department name, Office of Employee Experience and Performance, includes a component of employee relations, which manages workplace investigations. But we also carved out a unit specifically for performance management, which was embedded in employee relations prior to that, so that we could focus on performance coaching, as well as creating a better experience for employees. So I believe that we're headed in the right track.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Rihanna. And we're going to move right into our last report out on special education, and Caroline Main is going to join us at the podium.
It's the main event.
Yes. Last but certainly not least, right?
Okay.
What we've all been waiting for. Okay. Oops, going backwards. Okay. All right. Well, my name's Caroline Main. I'm a senior manager in our risk advisory and internal audit practice with Matt and Brianna, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. So I'll dive right in. Just as a starting point, so we were asked to evaluate the the administration of the special education services function. So I do want to emphasize this was not a regulatory compliance audit. We also did not look at the quality of special education. So we did focus on the administration. We focused on evaluating the policies, procedures, and practices related to the special education services function. There was a little bit of crossover between different departments as well. So the multi-tiered system of supports function, we focused on tier 3, which is really where identification and referral takes place for students to transition into special education services. So we looked at that part of the process, identification and referral, as well as the evaluation process and individual education program or IEP development. We looked at special education services administration and teacher training. We looked at virtual special education compliance. We looked at the transition of students from the Babies Can't Wait program into special education services at the district. We also looked at special education lead teacher and student support team class sizes and caseloads. to look for, equalities or potential inequalities across the district, across different clusters and schools throughout the district. We also looked at transportation requests for special education students and graduation rates. So there was a lot there. As I think Connie mentioned early on, we did expand our scope. So some of these areas, the virtual students, babies can't wait, transportation, et cetera, we kind of added those on as a result of some of our original interviews throughout the process and our parent focus group. So we did hear some of those concerns come up from parents in the community and did expand our scope a little bit to make sure that we were covering as much as possible from a policies and procedures standpoint. So like I said, we met with parents, we interviewed the Special Education Services Administration, we met with CELTS, we met with special ed coordinators, MTSS coordinators, psychologists, non-special ed teachers, and others across the district. So those interviews were very comprehensive. We then identified internal controls and performed sample-based testing, and then finally identified gaps and recommendations to mitigate risk, which we'll dive right into shortly. Okay, so a couple of themes we want to highlight before we dive into our findings. So firstly, I will note that key district policies did in fact align with the Georgia DOE regulations. However, what we noted is that those policies and procedures were not being consistently applied and adhered to at each school. This is primarily because of the next three themes here, one being record retention. So Go IEP was not being consistently utilized as the primary system of record. In many cases, documentation was not able to be provided for a lot of our sample-based testing. So I would say that's kind of the root cause of many of the findings that we'll talk about today. Another item is MTSS and special education training. We did note that those training materials don't address all key elements of policies and procedures. The training is also not mandatory, so there's not any kind of monitoring or accountability to make sure that these key individuals involved with special education are attending these training sessions or reviewing training materials. And then another thing we noted is that there's not a lot of cross-departmental training, which led to some kind of siloed work streams as we facilitated interviews and had discussions with different individuals. There maybe wasn't a lot of understanding of who's responsible for what, and there's not a lot of cross-communication or training to make sure that, faculty across the district understands what they're responsible for as it relates to special education. And then lastly here, we did note that the policies and procedures do use some ambiguous language, which could lead to misinterpretation and could cause some inconsistent practices across individual schools. Okay, so jumping right into the results here, we did have a total of 8 findings, 5 of which were high priority, 2 of which were moderate, and 1 was low priority. So starting off with our high priority findings here, again, kind of going back to the themes, we did note that the district policies and procedures were not followed in documenting identification and referral of special education services students. Use of documents is not standardized in many cases. So we do recommend mandating the use of standard forms for every school across the district. For example, like response to intervention plans are not standardized or are not used in a standardized format across the district, as well as problem identification checklists. So that's just a couple examples of forms that it would be helpful to standardize to have consistent practices across the district. We also recommend updating those standard operating procedures as well as the training to ensure alignment with district policy, so all schools are utilizing and retaining those standardized forms in Go IEP. We also noted that interventions are not monitored as part of the SST plan. So weekly progress monitoring for our interventions and monthly SST intervention meetings were not documented. We do recommend providing training to ensure that the MTSS and SST faculty understand the intervention progress monitoring policies, including, again, retaining documentation in Go IEP, and also recommend that they ensure that evidence of the intervention progress monitoring and meetings are documented in Go IEP. So it's possible that these meetings are taking place, again, however, through our sample-based testing, because the documentation was not in Go IEP, we were not able to confirm that these things are taking place in accordance with the policy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. And then third finding here is that some evaluations were performed without retention of written parental consent. So documentation did not verify that SST teams included necessary team members and that IEP team members attended those IEP meetings. So we recommend requiring that case managers do retain parental consent in Go IEP and providing training on required documentation for SST and IEP team members attending those meetings, including parent agreement to excuse attendees. So there are exceptions documented, again, in the policy for why there might be cases where certain members are not in attendance to those meetings, but without that documentation in Go IEP, it's difficult to prove that the parent consented and agreed to that, and that the district followed the appropriate procedures in advance to notify parents, provide the documentation that should be provided in advance, and things like that. Okay, so our last two high priority findings, the first one here is that required milestones were not completed in compliance with district policies and state regulations. We recommend utilizing Go IEP to monitor the flow of documents to ensure milestones are completed timely and in compliance with district policy. We recommend providing training to faculty involved in milestone completion to ensure timeline expectations are understood, as well as developing a formal process to document and retain evidence to substantiate reasons why timeline milestones were not met. Monitoring as well. So, we're talking a lot about utilizing Go IEP, providing training. You'll see in the management responses as well that there is a plan to monitor, right, which will be really helpful to ensuring that Go IEP is being utilized in accordance with the district policy. And then some documentation was not transferred from the predecessor system to Go IEP. So that transition to Go IEP took place last year. And so we did see that there was some documentation maintained in the Go IEP archive, so it was not readily accessible to us, but the district was able to provide additional documentation from the archive, as well as from other systems that are being used to retain documentation at this point, but it's not being used as the primary form of document retention. We think training during the pre-planning, beginning each year on how to utilize Go IEP effectively would be very helpful, as well as developing a formal SOP that includes an audit trail to substantiate that parents are provided with a draft IEP, for example, prior to the IEP meeting. Another thing I'll note here, like I said, there are some other systems being utilized, so obviously, it's a risk from a regulatory compliance standpoint that the documentation may or may not be able to be provided to regulators, auditors, et cetera, but also could pose a data security risk as well, knowing that there are other methods right now for retaining documentation. Okay, a couple of moderate priority findings. So we noted that training for MTSS and special education services faculty does not address several key components of the district policy. We recommend reviewing those training materials updating the training materials to ensure that all key components of the district policy are included. Like I mentioned in the theme as well, cross-departmental training would be helpful to understand everyone understands their roles and responsibilities and how those responsibilities kind of overlap and intersect. And then secondly here, so attendance at training sessions is not required currently per district policy. We did note that in our review that there were many individuals that had not taken the training or had not been provided the training. We do recommend requiring mandatory attendance for CELTS, MTSS, and other relevant faculty, as well as considering additional days during pre-planning, specifically related to training, establishing cross-functional training sessions as well, and then ensuring faculty that start mid-year receive the same onboarding and training as those who started at the beginning of the year. That also seemed to be a gap that came up in our interview discussions, is faculty that are starting mid-year are not provided the same opportunity for training as those that would have started prior to the beginning of the school year. Okay, and then lastly, with our low priority findings, so district policies and procedures employ language that lacks precision, which may lead to misinterpretation of policy. We recommend conducting a thorough review of existing policies and procedures, clarifying any ambiguous language, eliminating inconsistencies, and ensuring that information and timelines are clearly articulated. For items that are required to be tailored to student-specific needs, we recommend providing guidelines for CELTS and MTSS personnel to utilize. For example, a range of timelines for intensive interventions would be helpful. We understand that there are sometimes going to be exceptions to the rule, and that's okay, but we do recommend documenting those possible reasons for exception and what that, kind of review and approval process would look like to go, maybe around the policy a little bit. Those types of things should be documented so that they are in alignment with the policy as opposed to going around the policy. And then, that pretty much covers the last finding here. So as far as next steps, and then I think we'll open it up for questions. So management has agreed to implement the action plans by certain deadlines that are outlined in the report with management responses. We did, receive a lot of buy-in, participation in interviews, et cetera, from the district, which is great. And obviously, that all said, internal audit will continue to perform follow-up remediation. That will take place in the 25-26 school year, knowing that many of these things will take some time to implement and become standard practice. Questions?
Yes, there's certainly going to be a lot of questions,
Yes.
but I first want to thank you for this work, and I want to thank administration for raising this up and not waiting till it was something that we're forced to do, but being proactive and looking at where do we stand so we have a good baseline to figure out where there's room for improvement. I also want to thank Atlanta Thrive and the community for their advocacy around special education and their support. Expect Nisha back there. I get copied on emails, and I appreciate that. I know that it is not my role to respond, but I appreciate being in the loop in terms of what's going on. And so I think I can safely say I'm not surprised, but I'm glad that we have what we have. So we have the transparency, the accountability, and now a roadmap, right, to move forward. I'm thankful that Dr. Johnson is here because as we talked about this transition in leadership and how will these audit findings be held top of mind, I appreciate you taking the time to come here. I said this was the main event because this is something that we've all been waiting on. This is something that the board believes in greatly, that this is one of the major levers that if we flip, it's going to benefit everyone. So thank you for that quick soapbox. And questions? Okay, I'm gonna go this way. Katie.
I echo everything you said.
And quick note,
Yeah.
it is 11:56. We will definitely go over. This is time well spent, and so I thank you, everyone, for your patience in allowing us to continue this discussion. Katie.
Thank you, Chair Baldwin, and I echo everything you just said. And I'm so glad we're at this point in time with this information. And I'm looking at the management responses. I mean, obviously follow through on all the findings, but it's going to take a lot of work and time. And I know $9 million in the budget for special education, additional. Dr. Battle, can you talk about just some of the things you think that need to happen first in terms of just support for this work and really checking up on progress? Because it's going to take a lot of continual monitoring, and how you think that can best be done right now, and how we support from this committee space and then as a board.
Thank you for asking that question. I know we're positioned to make all of these steps happen, recommendations happen. We have the staff that we need. It all goes back to monitoring at every level, not just from the central office level, but it has to start at the schools, just making sure we're following back to the basic procedures, that parents are notified, that parents have the parents' right handbook every time. If they have 5 meetings in a year, they get 5 copies. They're more than free to leave it there, but we have to have those standard procedures and that they're monitored, like a sheet on top of every IEP meeting that you check in to make sure it happened. And so just making sure everyone's in tune with that. Our special ed coordinators, our special ed lead teachers, our special ed teachers, our principals, everyone. It's going to take everyone. But a lot of this stuff is really simple. It just has to be done. So it's that accountability portion, the monitoring of it.
Absolutely. And this is such a high priority of need, and this audit's pointing that out even more, special education. And we've seen where our students have been, and this is a large part of why. And that, we have policies in place, but it's that implementation and that follow through. So I'm even thinking back to our goals, and as we look to reset our goals, how this ties into that. And yeah, just even the monitoring and coming back to us with where we are with this, and then back to the board. I'm going to keep thinking of, follow up as to how we check in that space, because we know everyone's committed to the work, but we're going to have to continually have updates.
I think the check-in will come with the audit findings. With the audit meetings, with these meetings, when she's doing the remediation, to say, where are we with this? What does it look like? What does it feel like? It's not like a policy. It's just something that it can be reported back to this committee, because the schools and the district office and principals will be doing that with the support of the associate superintendents. But all of those reports won't come back. I think just the findings, because it's not just special ed, as we're hearing. It's a lot of areas that has to be tightened.
Okay, I'm going to jump online. Do we have Roland or Earl with any questions?
I don't have any questions at this time.
Excellent. Now I'm going to look to my left.
This is Roland. I don't have questions at this time.
Uh-oh. Look back to the right.
Did that come through okay?
You did or you did not have a question, Roland?
Oh, sorry. No, I do not have a question at this time.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Now I'm looking to the left.
Thank you for this audit report. Through the years as being a board member, we have received so many opportunities for improvement. With that being said, I'd like to kind of understand from the process in which you did this audit, where was the lack of oversight? So for me, I like to go backwards, pull back the layers and find out what was happening to get to the recommendations that you have. And I'm gonna break it down in like 3 different questions. One, what was the lack of oversight at, right? Then the other question is, why was the training not mandatory? And why and what were the barriers keeping for documents from being incomplete, transferred, foreign documents? Just kind of understand where was the breakdown in a lot of the findings that you were able to report. So that gives me an idea when we're looking at, I guess I would call it the recommendations, corrective action plan. As we are going through as administration is going through that process, we can actually, see where the breakdown was, where's the opportunity for improvement, and then what the outcomes look like. So I just kind of wanted to know from your experience doing this audit, where were those opportunities at?
Yeah, so to address your first question on lack of oversight. So as the process exists right now, the district policy is to, retain all of this documentation and go IEP. There is not currently any monitoring to ensure that documents are in fact retained in go IEP, or really, any monitoring to make sure that people are in compliance with the district policy. I would say from what we heard from our interviews, I think that's primarily because of it's a limited team, right? And there's a limited team right now to be able to monitor and I guess provide that level of oversight. Now, that said, part of management's response was that they plan to implement some level of monitoring. It will, of course, be on a sample basis, given, again, limited resources. I don't think it's realistic at this point in time for the district to, monitor 100% to ensure 100% compliance and document retention and go IEP. But there is a plan to perform some sample testing and monitor and ensure that, documents are retained and that documentation does align with the district policy. As far as your second question on why training is not mandatory, it's per the policy right now, it's not mandatory. I can't tell you why that decision was made as far as.
So you're saying that it wasn't a policy that make it mandatory?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I hate to jump in. It really doesn't have to be a policy. It could be, I think we're talking about practice here. So it does not need to be another thing put in policy. It needs to be from the administration.
Right.
These are mandatory trainings.
Right. Yeah, can't tell you, maybe, I don't know if management can speak to that. I can't tell you why that's not the practice or the policy, but that was the case, yes. Okay.
Thank you for that. And then what was the other one? Oh, crap. I was just asking about why were some of the barriers that was keeping incompletion of documents and transferring and I have to go back to my sheet. It required milestones were not completed in compliance with district policy and state regulation.
So some schools are using other methods of document retention, like Google Drives, for example, or that was really the primary one I think that was being utilized, unless some individuals that may have provided things via email to us potentially have retained the documents elsewhere. But when we asked, the primary other system of retention was Google Drive. So as far as why certain individuals are not utilizing Go IEP and they're using their own methods for document retention, I don't know that I can tell you exactly why, other than maybe that's their preference. I do think that we did get some level of individuals maybe not understanding the district policy. So I don't know that it was an intentional, I understand everything must be retained in Go IEP and I'm choosing not to do so. I think in most cases, that's not the case. It's more so a lack of understanding of the policy is to retain everything in Go IEP. And so without understanding that, they're using what they believe to be the easiest method for them, which might be retention in other systems. Yeah, does that answer your question?
No, that doesn't. Just
Okay.
kind of give me a little context when
Yeah.
I'm looking at high priority, findings, moderate and low.
Right.
When you pull back the layers, you find out the why and the what,
Yes.
right? So that's kind of how I work backwards to understand. And so thank you for giving that explanation. Thank you.
Yep. And again, we did find there were many individuals that did not complete the training, right? So that would probably be a root cause of that, right? Not understanding the policy. It'd be kind of difficult to understand the policy if you haven't reviewed it or attended training that mandates that things must be retained in Go IEP. So.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. So looking forward, just serving on this committee for, I guess, 4 years now, there are a couple recurring themes. One being document retention, and the other one being training. So for record retention and documentation, like I said, it's a system-wide challenge, and it appears in almost every audit. And so we may not have an answer today, but my question to administration is, do we have the systems and resources in place that allows this documentation and electronically? I heard we were talking about like paper receipts in a couple of audits ago, but do we have the resources and the systems in place is one, and then two, how do you make the training stick? So yeah, we can have training, you go on and you do like a little video and you gotta answer some questions at the end, but how impactful is that? How engaging is that? And how implementable, right, is that? So another challenge that I have to the administration is, how do we do that to our training? How do we make our training stick? And everyone, employees, staff, understand the importance of this training and that they actually do what is in the training. So I look forward to some examples and suggestions on how we bring this to life and how we make it stick and how we hold people accountable for the information. Again, this is a great baseline. It's good to hear that there will be follow-up. There will be continuous evaluation, and Superintendent, sole finalist, Superintendent Brian Johnson, I would love to discuss this in each of my monthly audit meetings. Each of my monthly one-to-one meetings, I would like an update on what's going on with audit, just so we know that things are moving forward, that you've got your finger on the pulse, and we're making change, and change for the better.
Board Member Baldwin, I'm gonna start with your back question. I won't answer the first one, but the back one, to make training stick, and this is just how we're raised in education, if you really go to the root of it, training sticks when it affects your paycheck and it affects your job. That's when training sticks. If you say that your job is contingent upon it. So that's when training sticks with people. When you say you can't hit kids and you hit kids and you're out of there, training sticks with special ed when you say when you don't comply, you don't have a job. So that's how training sticks. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
I'm sorry, if I could jump in, I agree with you totally that if training is tied to performance and compensation and roles and responsibilities, I certainly agree with that. But I do want to bring this comment up again. It's great, you can have all the training that you want, but there was a previous question about do we have systems and processes in place? What you really need to get to is what is the control that will monitor and identify the non-compliance early so that it is not caught until a year later when the audit is done. So I'm fine. I agree. People need to understand the policies and what their roles and responsibilities are. But we need to be thinking about what controls we put in place to take care, to address these gaps and to identify the violations real time. Otherwise, you just have repeated efforts. Again, training is not a control. So we just need to be thinking about how we do that timely and routinely.
Yes, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet? Audit Chair Baldwin and Audit Committee members. So a few things to emphasize that monitoring piece. One, we implemented Go IEP to hold people accountable. Everything is date stamped. Everything is in there. We can pull reports we couldn't pull before. So we knew these were problems before. And even in the year and a half I've been here, we knew I needed dates. I need to see documentation. It has to be there. So Go IEP comes with accountability. If you're using it, you're going to be accountable. So there's that piece. Number two, with the monitoring and training piece, we will be looking at least 50 files a month. So to do those monthly updates, we will be all over that next year. We'll do half from the MTSS side, half from the special ed side, so about 25 each month at a minimum, and keeping those looking for all of the things to be in there, not just what's in the audit, but what is everything that should be there. If they had an annual review, here's everything that they should have. So we'll be looking at it on a monthly basis. In addition, trying to close that training and support gap that exists between central office and schools. Every month, we'll be sending not only CELTs, but also their supervisors, here's what your CELT should be working on this month. Here are all the reports that go with it. And here's an optional training session if you're not sure what these things are. So the monitoring and the support. And then at the end of those months, if we see either from our samplings or from the things that should have been done that month aren't done, we'll reach out to the principals. And then if we don't get and the supervisors of the CELTs, and then eventually the associate superintendents if we need to. So we have two pretty intense layers of monitoring every single month, but also support in special ed. That's the plan.
I have one additional question, and we have a couple of others, but I'm curious around how are you touching and training the teachers that are not special education teachers but need to follow IEPs? How is that piece connected?
So we're trying to be intentional about weaving it into other, like the readers or leaders type work and the dyslexia work. So at this point, we don't have training for every single teacher in APS at this point. But if that was something that was the appetite of the board and the audit committee, that's certainly something that we could look at. We wanted to focus first on the CELTs, the school psychologists, the OTs, the PTs, that speech, everyone that provides the services and does those evaluations to get all of that right. But we absolutely could look at a secondary piece to reach all teachers.
There is an appetite, at least individually for me, to have that done. If you look at it in terms of a tiered plan. So yes, let's start with the leaders, but I believe everyone should be trained and made aware and held accountable for our students, all of our students. Was it Earl or Roland that had a question? Roland.
Hello. Question about the ancillary places in which data is being stored. I'm not sure where all those locations are, but maybe there can be a prioritization of the remediation plan to pull that in tighter than what it is today, and making sure that the approved secure tools are being used to store that information.
Excellent, thank you. And that's why we have experts on our team. Earl, did you have another question, or is your hand up from your previous response?
That was the previous, my apologies.
No problem, we appreciate you. Katie?
Thank you. Going back to the training piece, I mean, again, we allocated more money to special education and like identifying what is going to have the most impact, because we cannot do everything at a really high level at one time. So thank you, Dr. Battle, for setting us up. Dr. Johnson's going to have the runway, and we've got to support it. So, you know, with these updates, you know, how are we, the prioritization areas, like what's going to have the most impact based on the data you have, based on this audit, and how we support it. So, you know, if that IEP training, which we know is important for everyone, but where is that going to be in the list? I mean, I'm not asking for an answer now, but that's what we need to hear as a board. And I am not an IT person, but we're about to commit a lot of money to ERP, and it's going to touch every single department. So we're going to be getting updates as a board on the implementation of that, and I want to know how it's going to affect this area and support some developing efficiency systems, whatever it is. So I'm looking forward to getting that information too, because we're clearly hearing the documentation, the storage, the security around that. And one of the big reasons the board supported that investment right now is because of security concerns as well. So I'm making my notes, but I'm really excited. I mean, all there is opportunity, and we've committed the money. So, and we know there's a lot more to come, which is part of that monitoring and seeing where we have gaps and where we'll need to adjust. So get ready, Dr. Johnson, because we are, but we're excited about being in this space. And thank you again to everyone who made sure that we have all this information, and getting out where we are with the public will be critically important as well.
So,
thank you.
Dr. Johnson, we're about to pass this baton, and we gonna need you to grab it and run like Sha'Carri, and take us to gold, right? Okay, so, and now let's proceed with public comment. Mr. Glass, do we have any stakeholders who signed up for public comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have John with Atlanta Thrive.
Excellent. Yeah, we appreciate the support in this meeting. We had a lot to talk about. All right, Mr. John, it's on you.
First, I want to thank the board for undertaking this to do the audit. We really appreciate that, and it was the main thing that we really pushed in our special education campaign. We want to thank you guys for meeting with us, every board member actually meeting with us and hearing some of the demands that we wanted from what we were hearing from our parents. Remember, we have over 5,200 parents in our database, and we get at least 1,000 new parents each year. And so we're hearing these things, and everything that came from the audit is exactly what we were hearing as far as the accountability, the lack of training, general ed teachers not knowing what they need to do in conjunction with what the CELPs are doing. It was all the things, the IEP process not being streamlined, not being standardized. And so if you go back to those demands that we had put on our special education petition that we had, we said that we wanted you guys to implement a biannual comprehensive training program for the district and school staff in creating effective IEPs. We talked about also conducting thorough audits of the special education department, where we don't let it go so long to where now we get to an issue where it becomes legally binding. And we have to remember, these things shouldn't be optional, because these IEPs are legal documents. And people need to understand that. Staff need to understand that. And then we talked about also developing a comprehensive plan where not only do we do the training with the staff, but also parents are brought into that process. They understand what their rights are there. And then we're talking about strengthening community engagement. So this is the first piece, but we want to make sure it doesn't fall into a vacuum, that we're able to let the community know what's going on and what the plan is in place on how we're going to address these issues. Because, you know, across the district, there are certain schools that have a greater need in this area than maybe others, but we don't want to look at it from the standpoint of saying, well, we're just going to focus on this and just, here's our findings and nothing gets done from it. So I want to thank you guys, and we look forward to the next step.
Look at that, right on time. But I just want to state that this is an example of what can happen when everyone works together towards a common goal and a common cause, when we're not fighting each other, when we're not pointing fingers, but we're looking for solutions and answers. We had community, we had parents, we had administration, we had the board all on the same accord, and I truly believe that's how you make change, right? We got to work together, and this is a perfect example of everyone working together towards a common goal. And so I want to thank everyone who is participating and has participated in this process. And I will now entertain a motion. Oh, there's one more.
I'm sorry, Ms. Dews. I'm sorry.
How appropriate. We're going to have Ms. Dukes come and close us out.
Good morning. Thank you guys for just taking, just being bold and doing this audit. A lot of our children and APS will benefit. I hear you guys talk about training. I'm telling you guys, I have not been trained, and a lot of times it just take you a little fidelity and being patient. And I think the training that needs to happen is the customer service training, because a lot of times it takes us between 2 and 3 years to get an evaluation done. And so the people on the front line have to accept us as parents saying that our children need help, and that's not happening. Also, the communication. I didn't see anything about the way you guys should communicate to parents, but it should be done via email. I mean, everything should be done that way. And if you need to meet the parent in the carpool line to give them that document, and if you need to call, do that. But we need to make sure that everything is done via email. I learned that with just going in, a lot of times they lose the documents or they never follow back up. And I think the most important thing is the child find. Everybody in the district need to show up at that child find meeting. So a lot of times I call the names of Ann Durden and Emundia Ford because they lead special education. And that meeting, it was not advertised. And that's where you are educated as parents and educators and everyone else about how to identify a child with special needs. So we need to do a better job at that. I want to thank the board members, like John said, because each and every one of you guys met with us. Dr. Better, you heard about our campaign. Chelsea, I always thank you because you sit down and you listen to me when I fuss. But I also want to say the special education team has never gave us a chance to sit down and have the conversation. And so board members, Superintendent Chelsea, I think you guys need to have the conversation with them, because we're not here to just beat you down. We are here to be the protection when needed and stop a lot of the due processes, because we call Dr. Better all the time because of the customer service. And when you have leaders of special education that choose not to engage with advocates like myself or my team, then it hurts us. Because I remember the conversations, and a lot of times it's like, well, Ms. Dukes, we don't see that problem. It's only in certain neighborhoods. I go in every school you guys have, and every school give us the same treatment when it comes to special education. Thank you.
You could tell the professional commenters, right? They hit that 2 minutes. I appreciate you, everyone, for their comments, and again for keeping us aware, keeping our feet on the ground, and our head out the sky, right? So we can truly see what's going on. So now, are there any more? Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposition? Meeting adjourned. Have a great day.